In our home, we have Netflix, and that's how we tend to watch most of our TV. And so the other day when I turned it on, I was excited to see that there's a new Christmas movie. Actually, there's a lot of new Christmas movies on the channel. And there's one in particular that caught my eye called The Princess Switch. And as you can imagine, probably like you, I know how this story is going to go. I know how it will begin. I pretty much have a good sense how it's going to go in the middle. And I know how it's going to end. But I'm still looking forward to one cold night, wrapping myself up in a big blanket and watching this movie, this feel-good film. Because even though it stars a new star and it has a location, made-up European nation in the middle of the Alps somewhere, and is filled with cliches, it is a story that is as old as time, and it's just fun. And it reminds me of another story that the theologian Søren Kierkegaard wrote, steeped in great theology. And I'd like to tell you that story, because it is also as old as time, and you may recognize it. And it starts like any of these good stories. Once upon a time, there was a prince who lived in a kingdom, and he was right on the verge of inheriting the kingdom from his father. He had spent many years of his youth under the tutelage of his father, training and studying as to how to be the next king, and apprenticing under his father, watching as he ruled and as he judged. And the wise elders of the kingdom deemed that he was just about ready to take over. But there was one hesitation for the prince, and that is before he wanted to rule, he wished to be married, to have a partner by his side to rule alongside with. But the only problem was that so far, all the eligible women that had passed by him in the kingdom hadn't really caught his eye. And being a prince, he had met many beautiful princesses from other kingdoms, but none of them had sparked his soul either. One day, he was riding through the market maiden, who was working at a pottery stall in the marketplace. And as he looked at her, he was overwhelmed by her beauty. And he looked and he spent a bit more time just watching. And he saw that she was always smiling and laughing, and she seemed to be treating those who came with just such kindness. And so he stood back and watched a little bit more, and he realized that through all of her selling and bartering, she always seemed to strike a good deal for the customer, and yet was always managed to make some sort of profit for her family as well. She was fair but firm, and he saw steadiness in her. And he would go back every now and then and watch her again. And he was impressed by the strength of her arms as she came in and she threw clay upon the wheel and made beautiful objects. And then when the shop wasn't too busy, how she sat and was patient and took the time to carve into them beautiful patterns. And then to paint them as well. And then with her strength to put them in the kiln. Needless to say, over time, he found that he was falling in love. She seemed to have so many wonderful attributes, all the things that he was looking for in a wife. But there was only a slight problem, and that was he was to be king of the land, and she was a mere peasant in the world, in the kingdom, and that wasn't really done. And so he thought to himself, how can I get her to marry me? How is this going to work? And he thought, well, I could always order her to marry me. I am going to be the king after all. I have that right. But then he thought he really wanted to marry for love, and true love does not come when you tell people what to do. It's definitely not the good start for a lifelong relationship. So he thought again, he thought, well, I could go and dress up in all my regalia and bring my footmen with me and knock on her door and make a lavish display and announce that I would love her hand in marriage and ask her to marry me. then he thought of that and thought, well, I want her to love me for who I am and not just because I am rich and powerful and have all sorts of wonderful things. He didn't want her just so that she could have the life of luxury, but he wanted her to love him. So then he thought, well, maybe I could disguise myself. I could dress up like just an ordinary townsfolk and go into the village and pretend to be like one of them and get to know her, and we could develop a friendship and I could sweep her off her feet, and then once she knows and once she's truly in love with me, then I will reveal to her that I am in fact the prince. And she'll be so in love with me already that it won't matter. And he thought about this, and this idea was very attractive. But as he thought about it a bit more and was considering putting it into action, he thought to himself, well, if I was to do this, though, I would be beginning my relationship off in a lie. And he didn't like the idea of lying to her the whole time and then perhaps at the end her being angry. So he thought some more. And as he contemplated and as his love for her seemed to grow within his own heart, the prince finally made a decision to truly love her as an equal. He would renounce his kingship. He would give up his right to the throne, and he would move into the neighborhood just as he was, and he would start a new life off. And he decided maybe he could make his money by doing carpentry. I mean, after all, he had studied with all the great architects, and he always had loved the feel of wood on his hands. So he would open up a stall, hopefully close to hers, and he would get to know the people in the town. He'd go to church with them and hopefully be invited to some of their parties or get-togethers. And eventually, she might come to know him and to fall in love with him just as he was. Not for any of his riches or glory, not for any of his power or authority, but simply because of who he is. And because we all like a happy ending, that is exactly what he did, and they lived happily ever after. Now, this story Søren Kierkegaard wrote as a author's Emily, God's great love for us. Authors Emily Harka and Anthony Conan write, this was exactly God's problem when he looked down and saw us. God loved us and wanted our love. But God wanted it to be free and voluntary. God could have come and simply ordered us to love him. But that's not the type of love that God wanted. God could have come around the first time in the clouds of glory, as we hear about, and just shine down with all the angels and have us all in awe and on our knees. And being so dazzled and being just so dazzled that we would automatically want to love him and be part of his kingdom. But that's not what God wanted. God didn't want to overwhelm us at all or have us worship him just because. So what God did, as we hear from St. Paul, is though he was by nature God, Jesus did not consider himself being equal with God a thing to be clung to, but emptied himself, taking the nature of a slave and being made like unto men. And appearing in the form of man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Our Lord Jesus came down, he renounced his kingship and all the power and glory and took this great and noble risk that if he was born with us, if he lived among us and got to know us as we were, he could develop a friendship with us, and he could be with us and teach us and love us And through that love for us, show us the great love that God has and wants from us. This is not just a story of rags to riches, though. It's a story of riches to rags to riches. Because when our Lord came, he did not just disguise himself and pretend to be human. He truly was human. He was like one of us in all the great ways and all the not so great ways as well. And when he came down to us as human, he was never too worried about people looking down upon him. And he was not worried that people may not look up to him either. What he truly wanted was that we would look at him and see him as he was, to know and experience the love that he came to offer. And as we heard today in our gospel, we know that many people look down upon him. We hear the story today of Pilate sneering. What kind of king is Jesus? In his hands the power of life and death. As he spoke to Jesus at that trial, he said at one point, "Do you not know that I have the power to set you free or to crucify you?" But Jesus came from a different kind of kingdom. And Jesus came to show us a different kind of kingdom, which is a kingdom of love. And he is a prince who teaches us that it's not the kingdoms of this world, that it's not the riches or powers of glory of this world, although they might be shiny, attractive, that are powerful, but really it's true love. And he knew that anyone who listened to his voice would know this truth, that it is true love, that it is the power of love that really has the power, that really is riching to us, and that really brings us glory. And he promised that anyone who knew him would know this truth of love. And as we celebrate our great high King Jesus today, we know that the entire world is preparing to celebrate his coming again as one of us on earth. A king all of us will look down upon in the manger. A king all of us, whether we're religious or not, yearn to sing out about this Christmas season in hymns and in carols that tell this great, great old story. A story of a king who loved us so much that he was willing to come as one of us. A king who all the angels would sing out about. Glory be the newborn king, and for whom we all sing, "O come, let us adore him. O come, let us adore him. O come, let us adore him, the newborn king." Thanks be to God.